good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Minds on Guard, where we are taking a look at all of the ways that we need to learn how to guard our minds against what could be understood as behavior manipulation, behavior modification, the ways that we are under attack from forces that would seek to control our thoughts and behaviors, specifically filtered through mainstream media and all of the tools that are at that large entity's disposal. All of the different things that are covered under the umbrella of mainstream media. We've covered quite a lot so far. Last week, we began looking at and discussing what I've been calling think tanks. We started asking some questions like, what are they? What is their aim, and what sorts of thinking or philosophical underpinnings are existent in such organizations, and specifically with respect to the purpose of those organizations. To recap a little bit, think tanks are a significant component of the way things work in today's world, and that is due to their ability to influence and direct what's understood to be public policy within governments and the overall economic structure of the world. While we may not notice the influence that think tanks hold over our lives, at least in like the day-to-day goings-on of any given individual, they do hold quite a lot of power over the decisions that are present for us in society. So as such, for us to have like a serious outlook and goal of understanding the ways in which our minds are being shaped in today's world, we need to acknowledge the influence of the many large and extremely well-funded think tanks that operate each and every day. Everything that runs through any sort of regulating body, whether that be governmental or financial or agricultural, and most notably the media through which the information is distributed and communicated, will bear the fingerprint of some form of think tank research and policy development group. Just looking at the list on the think tanks that is present on Wikipedia, that gives us an indication of all of the areas of life that are touched by these research groups. If you can take some time to just scroll through that list, I think you'll be surprised at the cross-section of areas that are encompassed in these kinds of these entities. What I wish to make note of in this particular video is actually the nature of the relationship between these groups and just how their research affects our daily life. Most notably, the effect that they have on our ability to make choices freely and to have a say in the way that we run our lives. To start, it should be noted that not all think tanks are nefarious and evil. I don't wish to give the impression that I'm like fully against the notion of like collaborative understanding and development of systems in order to achieve growth and prosperity. The idea of like collaboration and research to push towards better results, more optimization in the world is definitely something that I support. It just depends on the means of why and how this happens. You know, this channel is actually a micro version of the very thing that I'm talking about. In my own way, I'm working to aid and influence with the main goal of maintaining my integrity and honesty to adopt certain behaviors and ways of engaging with the world. You know, I don't want to force anybody, but the reason I present the information is to at least get your mind working in ways that maybe it hasn't before. Definitely is trying to get my mind working in ways that it hasn't before. Nothing in life is black and white, And I understand that some of the most amazing and beneficial advancements in human civilization have come out of the many well-funded research institutions in the medical, scientific, socioeconomic fields of study. This is true, and at the same time, not all public policy groups have purely altruistic intentions. In order to have a serious discussion on any topic like this, we must be able to hold both truths or many truths simultaneously so that we can accurately assess what we're looking at. Now, this may seem obvious or sort of trivial to note at this point, yet I do find it important because often it's when I think I understand something without taking the time to really dig and look for biasing or ill-informed heuristics that I end up causing myself to miss a crucial piece of truth that, had I been observing better, or at least more diligently and rigorously, it would have saved me a lot of headache and trouble when it came to the deciding of what I actually think about a given topic. So regarding think tanks, we need to ask some clarifying questions. Specifically, what does it mean for these groups to have influence over public policy in the way that they do? Well, for starters, it means that whatever the think tank is trying to develop research on, it's very likely that we can expect to see the results of that research reflected in the public policy or governmental legislation that is put forward from that research. This being the case, it will also be very likely that what we see will affirm the expectations or aims of the entities who are providing the funding for any research that's being done. As was covered in the last video, these groups have a purpose, and that is influence. But the kind of influence and the areas over which the results of the funded research have sway will be determined on a case-by-case basis. Often, think tanks will have mission statements or philosophical goals on their websites or the various publications that they produce. These resources can be used to gain insight into what's being sought through any of the research or funding that's being done or given. And while this can tell us a lot about the nature of the influence that's being sought, it's also very important to investigate the monetary backing of these groups and if there is any specific areas where the backers themselves are seeking to gain influence. And do these things line up? Are the interests of the backers in the same field or ballpark or same area of life as the interest of the think tank they're funding? And this could be individuals or even small financial conglomerates. And it could be very difficult to discern just who or what is funding a given policy institute. But as they say, money talks. And if the money behind these groups has an agenda to pursue, you can bet that the investment will be aimed at having the maximal impact. So this means that what we should be on the lookout for are biased results or obfuscated errors or manipulations of the data that's in the research, and really just general corruption of the research data if we're going to be rigorous in our understanding of the agendas being furthered by the various public policy groups that exist today. The next question that I want to pose here is, if these think tanks' aim is influence, in what areas of daily life can we expect to see the influence that's being sought? There are many ways to approach this question, but for the purposes of this discussion, I think it's important that we hone in on what areas, at least what are areas where power and influence will have the maximum impact on the largest section of the society for the longest amount of time. There's a lot of qualifiers there, but all of them are very important. Remember that big money wants to maximize its return on investment. Really, any size of an investment needs to make sure it's doing that, otherwise it's not worth doing. Also, remember that the battle for influence is being fought in the minds of people. So, for the purposes of influencing people, it's best to target minds that are most malleable and amenable to accepting what is being given to them, or at least told to them. This is where the concept of societal programming comes into play. And we'll talk about that eventually as we continue to dig into this kind of material. But for now, we should expect to see that much of the public policy influence is going to be focused in the sectors of education, really at all levels. The school system at every level, be it from pre-kindergarten all the way through elementary, middle, high school, and definitely at the university level, is a major area where think tank research gets implemented as policy or prevailing ideology. Young minds in school are a prime target for exerting ideological and political influence. Because if a group that's seeking power can mold the minds of any youth of any given generation, then they tend to have the best chance of their ideology lasting further into the future than those who only focus on specific demographics that are either less open to being influenced or just physically have less time living in society. It's much more difficult to influence an old person to change their mind about something, and even if you do, how long is that influence actually going to last? That might be a dark thing to think about, but reality is as it is. The younger someone is, the longer they will be thinking and living and behaving and doing things in the world. There's another phrase, get them while they're young, and you've got them for life. Now, this may sound like paranoid and really very cynical. However, there's a great deal of evidence from the 20th century where we see this philosophy of targeting the youth in order to effect the greatest change over time being utilized heavily and at times with laser precision. The ideas of Wilhelm Wundt and the Leipzig lab come to mind, as well as what was spawned through Wundt's various proteges here in the United States. One more question that I think we need to pose here is, should we be okay with the ways in which well-funded ideological agendas are able to infiltrate public life and direct people's choices about the most important aspects of life? Now, the answer to this question really will be a personal one, so I can only speak for myself. I, for one, do not like the idea of centralized power and influence being wielded over people. I also do not like the idea of unelected and therefore unaccountable people or groups having so much sway and influence over the way things are in our society. When this kind of thing is allowed to run out of control, as it has for many, many years now, it leads to the abdication of personal responsibility in one's own life for one's own choices over some of the most important issues that we face as humans. We tend to want to offload it onto the think tanks to do the work, and then the various governmental bodies to actualize that new policy or understanding that has been gleaned from the research. And then we react to whatever they have deemed to be the best course of action for the greater good. But what if what I believe to be good is not the same view being held by the public policy group? What if I don't share the same values as the monetary interests that are behind the policy groups? These things can and do cause friction that goes far beyond the just sort of petty political back and forth of like conservatism versus liberalism. The issues outcrop much further into questions of what version of reality is understood to be the true one. This is a huge problem, and the results lead to really unspeakable tragedy and horror. I will not get into much more discussion on utopias here, but to understand what I mean with the intensity of the results of this, I suggest that anybody watching gives thought to what's happened every time that the greater good has been sought, regardless of the human cost of what is deemed to be the ideal world. In the next video, we're going to look at a specific think tank and take a little bit of a dive into its history, its funding, its evolution, and the many areas of influence that it has maintained over its existence. So, until next time, I hope you all stay safe, I hope you all check in on your loved ones, look after one another, and I hope you all stay diligent and vigilant with your minds on guard.